will see a 50-50 split between those that have matric qualification and the post-matric qualifications for them to continue to contribute to a safer South Africa. We will also continue our partnership with the University of Limpopo's Department of Criminology and the criminal justice system, where we now have going to enter into a memorandum of understanding to gain expert knowledge. We will also continue to work with the National Institute for Crime Prevention and the Reintegration of Offenders, an NPO that remains instrumental to help us in facilitating reintegration into society and the prevention of and reducing of recidivism, reintegration of offenders, and alternative sentencing for offenders, particularly amongst young people.
Thank you very much, Honorable Minister.
Thank you very much, House Chairperson.
The Honorable Jim Akwanishi.
Thank you very much, House Chairperson, Minister of Justice and Correctional Services, Honorable Ronald Lamula, Deputy Minister responsible for Correctional Services, Inkosi Phathekile Holomisa, Delizinta, Deputy Minister of Justice and Constitutional Development, Honorable John Jeffrey, Inspecting Judge, Judge Edwin Cameron, Honorable Members of Parliament, Executive Managers and personnel of DCS and GHC, ladies and gentlemen, good afternoon. The mission of the Department of Correctional Services is to contribute to a just, peaceful, and safer South Africa through effective and humane incarceration of inmates and the rehabilitation and social integration of offenders. In the 2023-2024 financial year, the department intends to accomplish this mission with a budget of 26.1 billion rands. This is a decrease of 1.9% or 503 million rands when compared with the allocation of 2022-2023 financial year. In order to supplement this budget, the committee calls on the department to put more emphasis on their self-sufficiency and sustainability model, as the minister has said. Chairperson, the department runs production workshops, bakeries, and farms in their correctional facilities across the country. These facilities should be fully utilized to realize self-sufficiency in the operation of the department. Through self-sufficiency, the department produces some of the best furniture in their correctional facilities, especially in Boksburg Correctional Center in Gauteng. In our oversight visit to courts and correctional centers in Mpumalanga last year, we witnessed firsthand that some of the court furniture, including benches, were ordered and produced from Boksburg Correctional Center. The committee would like to encourage other government departments to place their orders with the Department of Correctional Services when they need to procure furniture. When the committee visited Stanin Correctional Center in April 2022, we were informed that the center did not procure any vegetables in 2021-2022 because through their self-sufficiency program, they managed to produce 95,417 kilograms of vegetables and managed to save the center 682,682 rands 56 cents. Chairperson, Tswelopele Correctional Center baked 467,023 loaves of bread and supplied centers such as Biza Makate and Hofley management areas. The total savings for the fiscus amounted to 3.5 million. These are just few examples of how self-sufficiency and sustainability model of the Department of Correctional Services is saving the state and in addition imparting much needed skills to offenders. These are the skills that can be used upon their release back into their communities. Recently, offenders in Pietermaritzburg Medium A constructed a 5-room house for the Zondi family in KwaMaphumuza area who were left homeless after the devastating floods that ravaged the parts of the country in April. The department used offender labor and the material which was donated by local businesses in the area. The committee extends its appreciation to Pelican Development and Planning, Build Right, as well as Amashange Holding, who chipped in and buy furniture for the house. This is a good partnership that should be encouraged in assisting our communities. Another positive partnership was witnessed in March 2023, when the Department of Correctional Services, using offender labor, partnered with the Gift of Givers to build a house for another family, also in Kwashange village outside Pietermaritzburg. Honorable members, the department indicated that they will be having their first community corrections built using offender labor in July 2023. In our recent visit to Colesberg Correctional Center in April 2023, we also witnessed that an agricultural and maintenance store was converted to a pharmacy using offender labor. These are some of the good stories that show how the department is benefiting from using offender labor. In the 2023-2024 financial year, the department has allocated an amount of 1.2 billion for offender development and will be having 90% of offenders participating in long occupational programs. For the next 3 years, the department has budgeted 13.8 billion for facilities and plans to create additional 1,000 bed spaces. The committee is seriously concerned about the state of infrastructure in many of our correctional facilities around the country. A number of facilities are very old and dilapidated, and that poses a number of risks, including escapes and inhumane detention of inmates. Honorable members, Ladenburg Correctional Center under Barberton management area was built in 1800, while the youth town was built in 1884. Heidelberg under Boksburg management area was built in 1888. These are some of the facilities that need serious upgrades and refurbishment. We all know that the Department of Public Works and Infrastructure is the custodian of all government buildings. In many of the centers visited as the committee, the complaint we received was about the slow pace in which Public Works services them. Another complaint related to the poor workmanship by contractors appointed by Public Works. For instance, the committee was informed during our visit that Colesmore remand detention, medium B and female centers were still leaking, although Public Works contractor was appointed and work was performed. The committee will have to discuss how departments within the security cluster should be serviced and how projects should be accelerated within the cluster. As the committee will reaffirm our support for the work done by the Judicial Inspectorate for Correctional Services under the leadership of the inspecting judge, Judge Cameron. They have ensured independent inspection of our correctional centers and have reported on the treatment of inmates and on conditions in correctional centers. The committee has noted with concern the reduction in the 2023-2024 allocated budget of GHC by 2.6 million rands. We hope that when the GHC bill is finalized, it will address the independence both financially and operationally of the Judicial Inspectorate for Correctional Services and other related challenges faced by the Inspectorate in carrying out their mandate. We would like to thank Judge Cameron and all staff members of GHC for the good work done in the year under review. Honorable members, during our oversight visits to correctional facilities, we came across in all provinces, we had an opportunity to witness firsthand the hard work done by officials of the department in carrying out the mandate of rehabilitating offenders and in keeping them in safe custody. As the committee, we want to extend our appreciation to the officials of the Department of Correctional Services and the management of correctional services. Chairperson, let me take this opportunity to thank the Executive Authority of the Department of Correctional Services, in particular the Minister, the Deputy Minister, the National Commissioner, and his team for their leadership. Through our words and actions, we should always communicate a message to inmates and society that correctional facilities are not a place of condemnation, but a place that should build characters. Out of our correctional centers, we should build leaders and entrepreneurs of tomorrow and not condemn people to a permanent life of nothingness. Our correctional centers should be universities of life where regrets are converted into positive life experience. Chairperson, we support this budget vote.
Thank you very much, Honorable Magwanisha. The Honorable Engelbrecht.
Honorable members, during this budget vote, it is necessary to take stock of the last financial year's performance. I'm sorry to say that after assessing the performance, I came to the conclusion that the problems that existed during the last financial year are still prevalent this year. In terms of measuring performance, one has to look at the department's core mandate, that is incarceration, rehabilitation, and reintegration into communities. In terms of incarceration, overcrowding seems to be a perpetual problem, while the ratio between officials and inmates remains decidedly unsatisfactory. The ever-increasing number of remand detainees and the department's apparent inability to accommodate them in decent conditions seems unsolvable. Answering 7 questions might be helpful in this regard for what it's worth. What are the key factors contributing to the high remand detainee population in South Africa, including systemic inefficiencies, risk assessment practices, and socioeconomic factors? What are the international best practices and successful strategies implemented in our jurisdiction, in other jurisdictions, to reduce the remand detainee population and alleviate prison overcrowding? How can these strategies be adapted and implemented in the South African context? What is the effectiveness of existing initiatives and interventions in South Africa aimed at addressing the issue of remand detainees and reducing prison overcrowding, such as bail reforms, alternative measures, and case management practices? What are the experiences, perspectives, and needs of remand detainees and key stakeholders involved in their management, including judicial officers, legal professionals, and correctional personnel? How do these perspectives inform potential strategies and interventions? What evidence-based recommendations and policy implementations can be proposed to guide relevant stakeholders in implementing effective strategies to reduce the remand detainee population, improve the efficiency of the criminal justice system, and alleviate prison overcrowding in South Africa? In terms of rehabilitation and reintegration, one needs to look at the recidivism rate in South Africa, which remains amongst the highest in the world. That is your true measurement. This points to failure. Are the rehabilitation and upskilling programs within our correctional facilities still relevant and of use? Would an inmate be in a position to acquire a job after being released from incarceration? I don't think so. In answers to a parliamentary question about contraband in South African prisons, the minister gave a figure of 37,000 illegal cell phones that was confiscated. During the same period, only 24 officials faced disciplinary action relating to contraband. This creates the perception that corruption in DCS is endemic, with little or no consequences for the perpetrator. The lack of progress made with recommendations by the Zondo report firmly establishing the culture of impunity. I have to use this opportunity to mention the scandalous inaction and delaying tactics of DCS. The department signed an agreement with unions on OSD during 2009. According to an addendum to the agreement, they should have paid members as from March 2017 to March 2020. The in-service members received their money. Some of the pensioners also received their money, while others received only a certain percentage, and some received nothing. The department told pensioners that an audit needed to be done since 2017. According to the department, the calculations were done incorrectly. It is 2023 now. 6 years later, those DCS pensioners are still waiting. Some have died in the meantime without receiving money owed to them. This is disgraceful. Even after winning a court case, there's no relief for these pensioners. To make matters worse, DCS has now appealed this court decision. You have to wonder, do you hope that more of them will die before you have to pay them out? It is really scandalous. The dysfunctionality of our parole system and the dire effects thereof on the entire criminal justice system is of great concern. Since the Honorable Lamola became the minister, he has stated every year without fail that the parole system is in a desperate need of reform and will be reviewed. His term as minister is almost over now, and nothing has come of this so-called review. All is, however, not doom and gloom. I am encouraged by the implementation of the self-sufficiency strategic framework at all facilities. The savings of 372 million rand to taxpayers over the last 3 years is commendable. To quote Honorable James Self, prisons work where prisoners work. I hope this initiative will be expanded. And I have to congratulate the National Commissioner Kobachale for this initiative. Further good news is that the GHC bill was presented to Cabinet on the 10th of May. The independence of GHC is of critical importance. This bill will hopefully provide that. The reduction in budget for this financial year means that DCS has to do much more with far less. There are a lot of good people and dedicated people in correctional services, and I wish them all of the best. But at the current trajectory, I am unfortunately not filled with confidence. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Honorable Member. The Honorable Yapo.
Thank you very much, Chairperson. Chairperson, this year marks 10 years of unbroken struggle for economic emancipation of our people. Ours is the most noble struggle post-1994, ours being the EFF. And over the past 10 years, we have stood shoulder to shoulder with our people, demanding justice and dignity for all. The very conception of correctional service within this country is at the coalface of justice. And at present, the prison inmate population is just over 152,000, which is over 40% more than the available bed space at these prisons. Just over 3,000 of these inmates are in prison only because they could not afford the fines, which were an alternative punishment to incarceration. Some, as in the case when we went to Colesberg prison, and when we met some prisoners, and some of them only owed 100 rand, some 200 rand, which they could not afford, but they've been staying at the prisons for months. This contributes to over 40,000 of these remand detainees, some of whom have been in jail for years. This is an unhealthy environment in which many of those working in correctional services find themselves, and which many inmates are condemned into. Under these conditions, gangsterism is rife and is actually encouraged by the system. Prison warders are forced to work in a system that is corrupt to an extent that those against corruption are frowned upon. It is these conditions that make it difficult to see any good from correctional services, despite the fact that there are thousands of honest and committed men and women which we have seen when we have gone to the correctional centers. When visiting correctional centers, one cannot help but see the level of organizational discipline that goes into the job of holding those society no longer deems fit enough into account. It is often a thankless job, an unsafe job, and for most correctional officers, they embrace, they love, and they do incredible work. Some facilities with no resources at their disposal do best with maximum discipline. So the Dr. Nandipama Kudumana and Bester issue is therefore not an aberration, but an inevitable outcome of a system that is thoroughly rotten. The human resource system in the department is completely rotten, and there are no proper human resource management systems in the department. There's no safety for prisoners and officers alike, and this is demonstrated by how Thabo Bester was classified as dead and the role of those tasked with guarding him in facilitating this escape. So for years, we've asked the minister about the rationale of outsourcing the management of the prisons to private entities, as was the case in Mangaung. And when we asked, we're fully conscious of the prison industrial complex that has turned the lives of poor Black men, in particular, into commodities that could be dispensed at will to make money for capital. A life was lost in Mangaung, and his body was criminally used to let a rapist and a murderer out of jail. This was facilitated by the private entity that the minister had defended for a year. This would surprise me, therefore, if we were to find that G4S has some of these top politicians in their pockets. When we asked the minister about this G4S contract, he repeatedly replied with arrogance that we will wait for 2026 for this contract to be dissolved. So the question begs, would this have been terminated if this had not been now worldwide news? It is encouraging that self-sufficiency will form part of this budget, as through concentrated oversight done by the committee, we have seen how our state could benefit from the work done from correctional services. We've seen a high level of woodwork from our centers. We've seen that the state could absorb these and utilize them. Their farms are mostly well run and well functioning, and most correctional centers can self-sustain from them. However, there are correctional centers, such as the one in Colesberg, that lack proper security for and from the community. So these centers are debilitated with no proper care because they hardly appear in the news. So one would know that in Colesberg, most of the society is very poor. Most of society is very, they don't have jobs. Most of them are uneducated. And it feels to us as if those kind of centers are not taken care of. The structures are not taken care of. The clothes are not taken care of. The food is not taken care of. In fact, the walls that protect society from the correctional centers are not properly structured. And this has not been a concern for correctional services. One correctional center should be a model for the next if we truly value correctional services in South Africa and South Africa's society. So through then wanting a safe and just and peaceful South Africa, we should not contribute to the same in which way we do not want. So it boggles one's logic then, why would a crucial department's insecurity, such as this one, is then provided with a less budget than the previous year, in the same year where it needs to work harder than it has ever done before? So we reject this budget as much as we reject the person who leads it, because he might be young, but he possesses no skill, neither the dynamic imagination. Thank you.
Thank you, Honorable Member. The Honorable Msimang. Order, members.
Honorable House Chair, Honorable Minister, Honorable Deputy Minister, and honorable members. We as a nation have
honorable
come from a
members,
past
please.
where prison facilities were used as tools for torture, oppression, and unjust punishment by a government that apparently hated its citizens. Almost 30 years into our democracy, one would have thought that we would have made big reforms to the correctional services system that would seek to rebuild the very fabric that holds our citizenry together. That is to instill a sense of belonging, constitutional ethics and values amongst all of us. This department has an important role to play in balancing the rights of victims, whereby incarcerating the offenders in its facilities, but also rehabilitating them in order to reintegration for society with a better sense of moral and ethical values. The IFP notes with concern the lack of funding and a number of inspectors in prisons to conduct regular inspections. Additionally, in light of the recent events regarding the privately run correctional services facility by G4S, it is worrying that this department has taken a reduction of its overall budget. As we have been reassured by the Minister of the Thabo Bester breakout ordeal and the department's response plans to dealing with this matter, it does not leave one with a substantial amount of confidence in the correctional services system. The fact that an inmate broke out of a private facility is one matter, but the government has served a 90-day notice to cancel the contract with the private security firm that manages the facility. The reduction of its overall budget obviously means that government will need to commit funds, either taking over the facility or building new premises and sufficiently staffing them. While we do applaud consequence management decisions to cancel the contract, we think that better planning of this department is needed in order to correctly rehabilitate the inmates of the Mangaung Correctional Center. We are looking forward to government's response explaining exactly how funds from this department will be used to cater for the inmates of Mangaung Correctional Center, and what is government's plan to ensure that all human rights obligations are met. The IFP supports the budget vote. I thank
Thank you, Honorable Prof. The Honorable Vessels.
Thank you, Honourable House Chairperson. House Chair, the Minister started his address this afternoon by referring to the fact that the department was in the media, as we all know, now, because of Thabo Bester's escape. But this is not the first time the department has featured in the headlines. It's not the first time, and it's not the only time. And it's also not the first or only time that Mangaung prison has made the headlines. It's also not the first time that G4S, who is in control of that prison, has made headlines, and the inefficiency of their management has made headlines. Maybe it was not due to escapes, but due to irregularities nonetheless. Corruption, bribery, rape, attacks, assault, hostage situations, drugging of prisoners, human rights violations, and the list continues. To such an extent that in 2013, on the 9th of October, the department took control back of Mangaung prison, just as they did now on the 22nd of May. The ANC members applauded when the minister said that the department took back control. But it's not the first time. 10 months after that first time they took back control, they gave back control to G4S. Will that again happen? And why did it happen in the first place? 10 years ago, it was already a known fact that there's a very, very big problem. There was a commission of investigation, but nothing was actually done. And then the minister talks about rehabilitation. And the member to my right refers to the fact that prisons should be universities of life and should play an integral role in rehabilitation of offenders. But the statistics speak for themselves. 90% of released prisoners re-offend. 70% of released prisoners are reincarcerated more than thrice. There's a huge problem because our prisons are not rehabilitation or reintegration centers. Those programs fail, Minister. what happens in our prisons are that offenders become more involved in criminal activities. They go to prison even for smaller offenses and leave prison being murderers. That is what happens in our prisons. And it's because of, as the member from the DA also mentioned, because of the ratio of wardens to inmates, because of the maladministration, poor management, but also because of these private contractors in these specific prisons that are exploiting government and are not actually doing a good job. They are trying to make profit. And obviously, it is profitable having people in prison, not having people out of prison. And that's the problem with the privatization of our prisons. The ANC is so against privatization, yet they privatize institutions that should really not be privatized, and definitely not on that way. And it's ironic. It's ironic that you shout about privatization when it actually makes sense. But there, where companies with your friends in it exploit government, there you are silent. There you are shocked that this big companies are exploiting government and are poorly managing our prisons. And go and learn from other countries. Go and look what this very company, G4S, does in prisons in India, does in prisons in the United Kingdom. How many irregularities there are in those prisons. So why don't you do your homework? Why don't you try to get out of contracts that are failing? And there are ways to get out of that contract. You don't have to renew it, and you don't have to wait the term, because there should be counter performance, as the minister should know through his qualifications. I thank you.
Thank you, Honorable Bessels. The Honorable Swartz.
Thank you, House Chair. House Chair, the ACDP notes with concern that the reduction in the budget allocation by 509 million rand for this financial year. And clearly the department will need to reprioritize their plans to ensure that the rehabilitation of offenders and safe custody of inmates is not compromised by this reduction. Now, the department, or more particularly G4S, was in the news for all the wrong reasons following the brazen escape of Thabo Bester after fake suicide, which only came to light earlier this year, despite taking place in May last year. Once the DNA and postmortem reports were available in June already last year, it was very clear that Bester had not died in the fire, but had conspired with G4S officials in an elaborate escape plan under the guise of a fake suicide. The ACDP and many others were deeply concerned that the public, and in particular rape victims, were not advised that a serial rapist and murderer had escaped. And it appears that there's no policy in place. Imagine if rape victims had seen Bester walking about in public when he was supposed to be serving a prison sentence. The lack of action from May last year to March this year, despite credible evidence available, placed the lives of vulnerable women and children at risk. The inspecting Judge Cameron explained that GHC had tried its best to expedite SAP's, G4S and DCS investigations, but very little was done. Investigations seem to have only been expedited after overwhelming evidence provided by ground-up journalists. Judge Cameron had warned that this will be a catastrophe for the whole administration of justice. A notorious felon can get out of a maximum prison. What does it say about the criminal justice system? The ACDP agrees. Honorable Minister, you correctly apologized to the nation for this serious lapse. And once tracking and tracing were eventually commenced this year, Bester and his accomplices were arrested. As more information emerges, the ACDP trusts that all those corrupt G4S officials who facilitated this escape will face the full force of the law. And we commend those investigators who successfully prevented the removal of the burnt body, who we now know is that of Mr. Katlego Bareng. Our thoughts and prayers are with his family at this very sad time. Lastly, House Chair, the ACDP is fully aware of severe overcrowding at many of the correctional sentences. We visited Colesberg. There's an awaiting trial detainee that 100 Rand, Deputy Minister, in bail. We spoke to the judicial officer late and he said that will be reassessed. But clearly that is costing the department 350 Rand per day. And a lot more needs to be done to address awaiting trial prisoners. We believe that that can result in a cost saving to the department. I thank you.
Thank you very much, Honorable Member. The Honorable, the Deputy Minister of Justice and Correctional Services.
Sorry, in some time before last time I came here. Minister of Justice and Correctional Services, Ronald Osi Lamula. Deputy Minister of Justice and Constitutional Development, John Jeffrey. Honorable members, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen. In line with priorities in South Africa's development agenda, including the National Development Plan 2030, Chapter 12, Building Safer Communities, as well as the medium-term strategic framework, Priority 6, Social Cohesion and Safe Communities. An integrated approach to safety and security requires coordinated activities across the JCPS cluster. All vulnerable groups, majority of whom are women, children, rural communities, and those living in informal settlements, should enjoy equal protection of the law, and their fear of crime should be eradicated through effective coordinated responses of law enforcement agencies, business, community, and civil society. Central to DCS efforts in breaking the cycle of crime is the successful reintegration into society of all those under the care of the department. This is achieved through advancing victim-offender reconciliation, increasing accessibility to efficient community correction services, and creating economic opportunities for ex-offenders, parolees, and probationers. To achieve this, community corrections focuses on the restorative justice program, which is aimed at elevating the victim to the center of the criminal justice system by making sure that victims are not forgotten when the department rehabilitates and reintegrates those who have offended. In the 2021-2022 financial year, 16,951 victims and 5,758 offenders, parolees, and probationers participated in the restorative justice programs. In the financial year 2021-2022, 99% of the 52,054 parolees complied with parole conditions. However, it is of serious concern to us that the 1% who do not comply with parole conditions commit even more heinous crimes, leading to understandable outrage in society. Naturally, we would be happy to achieve 100% compliance, were it not for the human frailties from which none of us is immune. Through its social reintegration framework, the department is repositioning the system of community corrections. In the context of this framework, placement into community corrections includes all types of conditional placement and placement under correctional supervision. The overarching aim of the social reintegration framework is to keep individuals in the community. Through community corrections, DCS will provide supervision interventions and tailored services to prevent reoffending, thereby improving public safety. In terms of community outreach programs and improved social reintegration through strategic partnerships, 233 Izimbizo were held, including victim offender dialogues, marketing of DCS programs, public amenities, cleaning projects. In March of this year, we renewed the Memorandum of Understanding with the National House of Traditional and Poison Leaders, following the signing of the first MOU in 2019. Encouraged by the successes achieved by the partnership, the department sought to strengthen relations between both institutions in order to gear the MOU towards improved community corrections and efficient reintegration of offenders. This partnership with the National House of Traditional and Cohesion Leaders illustrates our commitment to making corrections a societal responsibility as outlined in the white paper on corrections. The department also held a dialogue on the role of traditional leaders in gender-based violence and femicide and drug prevention in Limpopo on 3 August 2022. The dialogue was convened in conjunction with the United Nations ODC, the University of Venda, and the Limpopo House of Traditional and Cohesion Leaders. The department continues with efforts to facilitate access to economic opportunities for ex-offenders, parolees, and probationers. In the financial year of 2021-2022, 592 economic opportunities were facilitated. In the same period, 6,400 parolees and probationers participated in various community initiatives as part of giving back to the community. In the current financial year, the department aims to significantly improve on the 344 job creation and socioeconomic opportunities facilitated for victims of crime in 2022-2023. In addition to pursuing district-specific partnerships with the business and NGO sector to leverage the district development model, the department entered into a nationwide MOU with the National Youth Development Agency, which is focused on providing demand-driven skills training, entrepreneurship development programs, and facilitating job placement opportunities. In December 2020, the Constitutional Court declared certain provisions of the Correctional Services Act of 1998 invalid insofar as they failed to provide for adequate independence for GHC. The declaration of invalidity was initially suspended for 24 months to afford Parliament an opportunity to remedy the defects. In November 2022, Constitutional Court extended the suspension of invalidity for a further 12 months period. On the recommendation of the Interdepartmental Assessment Committee, the minister led engagements with DCS, GHC, and National Treasury towards the establishment of GHC as a national government component, so as to afford its adequate independence to execute its oversight mandate. The result of this robust consultation is the Correctional Services Amendment Bill and the GHC Bill, both of which are ready to be put through the legislative processes of Parliament. The purpose of Government Information Technology Officer, GITO branch, is to create business value through the provisioning of reliable, integrated, and secure ICT infrastructure and business application systems to ensure effective strategic alignment and enhancement of business processes in TCS. GITO has been experiencing delays in the procurement of services to enable it to deliver effective communications technologies through the cabling and mesh network implementation. As a result of these delays, progress in the implementation of the integrated inmate management system has been slow. Network switches have been installed in 60 of the 65 identified sites. Telephone communication is also being improved. To date, GITO has implemented voice over internet protocol in 28 sites. The Microsoft implementation project is progressing well. The department has started reaping the benefits. On 12 May 2023, we embarked on one of our working visits to Pavian Sports Management Area in the Gauteng region to interact with officials who work at the coalface in order to understand challenges relating to their basic conditions of employment and to inspect the state of operations at the facility. The management area is one of the management areas which contribute significantly to the department's self-sufficiency and sustainability strategy framework through its production of eggs, chicken, beef, pork, dairy products, and vegetables. All farming activities are operated through offender labor, where valuable farming skills are transferred to the inmates, which they will utilize to earn a living upon release. The management area is thus able to supply its produce to a number of correctional centers. We will enhance existing self-sufficiency and sustainability projects and improve the distribution of self-produced products amongst regions to ensure that as far as it is possible, department uses offender labor and skills to provide for its own needs. House Chairperson, as I commend to the House this budget vote for support and approval, I wish to convey my gratitude to Minister Ozi Lamula for his inspiring leadership, to the National Commissioner for his decisive management of the department, to the senior managers, officials, and employees of the department and the ministry for their dedication to service. I'm more than pleased with the good working relationship and mutual respect we enjoy with the Judicial Inspectorate for Correctional Services under the leadership of Justice Cameron, without compromising its integrity and independence. Commitment of the National Council of Correctional Services and the Correctional Supervision and Parole Boards in discharging their unenviable task of determining who should and who should not be released before the expiry of their sentence period on parole is applauded. Importantly, I wish to extend my appreciation for the support, chastisement, guidance, advices, and leadership we receive from the chairperson and the honorable members of this portfolio committee whenever we appear before them. Lastly, the support I receive from my family, I do not take for granted. I thank you.
ATM. ATM. Thank you. Honorable Sheikh Imam.
Thank you, Honorable House Chairperson. The National Freedom Party will support the budget vote tabled here today. Allow me once again to draw the attention to this House. 4,450.
Honorable Chair, may I raise on a point of order, please?
Point of order. What is your point of order, member?
I presume the honorable member is about to refer to something in Palestine that has nothing to do with the debates in this House, and I object on a point of relevance. Let him prove me wrong and raise something else for a change, Chair.
That is not a point
So I
of
raise on
order.
a point of relevance, Chair.
That is not a point of
Relevance.
order.
Thank you, Chair. Let us hear what he says. Then I'll withdraw.
Proceed.
Thank you, House Chairperson. The truth hits, and it hits very hard. Indeed. 4,450 Palestinians, so-called
Thank you, Chair.
security
I rise on a
prisoners,
point of order.
are
Chair.
languishing in prison.
Chair, would you rule?
Of them,
Arise. Would you,
Proceed, honorable member.
would you
On a
recognize? the
point
chair?
of order.
No, now, Chair, maybe I was a bit premature, but now I raise on a point of order of relevance. Relevance to the issue of the debate, which is the correctional services. The honorable member in every one of his debates is raising this issue. And it is, I would submit, it is not relevant, Chair. And I would ask you to rule in this regard. Thank you.
Hey, sit down. Who asked you? Hey, hey, but
Will you allow me a minute to consult?
this is speech.
That point, thank you, members. That point of order is not sustained. It's a point of debate. Continue, member.
Thank you very much, House Chairperson. 160 of these detained are children, 32 women, and over 1,000, which they call administrative detainees. And we know those are what we've experienced in this country, detention without trial. Over 1,000 of them languishing in prison. But, you know, Chairperson, I want to admit, I did not know, and I want to commend this department, because I've been raising repeatedly, and I think the honorable members will be aware, of the baking industry and in the correctional facilities and the training of inmates and reintegrating them into society. Indeed, I've realized today that, of course, you do have a program, and I think it's commendable. You know, if you look at the cost of bread today, it's going to cost you about 8 rand to make it, but you're paying over 20 rand if you're buying it out. But I think it's also important, while we are Minister, to train those in there so that when they go back into society, they can be absorbed by the baking industry, which I think is very, very important. Now, one of the challenges that correctional facilities is facing is overcrowding. And I see, you know, a lot of emphasis is on dealing with issues after the fact. And we repeatedly raise the concern of moving into trying and preventing the high levels of crime in society. Perhaps that is going to be the solution in the long run. One of the issues and problems we do experience is, Minister, parole officers. They are not very effective, particularly in certain communities and certain areas. And you would find that amongst the high levels of crime in the country is committed by repeat offenders in South Africa. And I think it's a matter that needs a bit of attention. But having said that, we must understand that detainees, once they are released into society, experience all kinds of difficulties. They can't get finance, they can't get a job, they are blacklisted, there's stigma attached to their names, and perhaps we need to look at an integrated system of how we could have them absorbed into society once again, you know, to help them. Because what you find is that when they come back, if I give you a good example, somebody that has been selling drugs comes out there, he's got no job. Nobody wants to accept him or her. What happens? They end up standing on that street corner. Here comes the drug dealer and says, well, there's an opportunity. Man is hungry. What is he going to do? So I think these are some of the things that we need to look at. So I think the department is moving in the right direction. I think you need more money. There's no doubt about it, to put up more correctional facilities and improve your quality of service that you provide.
Thank you.
Thank you. The NFP supports the budget vote. Thank you.
Thank you. I call on Honorable Ramolo Beng.
Thank you, House Chair. Minister Ronald Lamola, Deputy Minister John Jeffrey, Deputy Minister Nkosiphathekile Holomisa, National Commissioner Mr. Tobahale, honorable members, good afternoon. House Chair, the ANC support this budget vote, and I wish to begin first with an extract from the memoir by our former Deputy Chief Justice, Dikgang Moseneke, titled My Own Liberator, in the chapter called Education Project, open quote. Surprisingly, the authorities did not resist with any seriousness the right of every prisoner to study. Their remaining line was that you might forfeit your right to study if you were convicted of a serious breach of the prison code, or if you abused the right to study. Neither we nor they knew how far-reaching the study project would become for a prison life, and in time for a liberation project. The right to study changed our lot more than anything else. It extracted the emotional sting from imprisonment. Only physical restraint and discomfort remained as we took refuge in mental activity. A prisoner who cared to study would, in effect, escape from prison. It was a case of mind over time. The space to study freed fresh energy and gave us ambient hope, close quote. House Chair, we will recall that the former Deputy Chief Justice was sentenced to 10 years and was imprisoned on Robben Island at the tender age of 15 for participating in anti-apartheid activities. At the heart of the apartheid prison system was deterrence and redistribution as a means of punishment. Little attention was placed on correcting the offending behavior, rehabilitating and socially reintegrating him or her. Nevertheless, physical incarceration, harsh conditions, and even inhuman treatment could not imprison the mind of some political prisoners. Moseneke, the Deputy Chief Justice, obtained a Bachelor of Arts in English and Political Science. a BJuris and a Bachelor of Laws degree from the University of South Africa while serving his sentence on Robben Island. After years in the legal profession and having played various important roles in the country, the Deputy Chief Justice Moseneke ascended to the Apex Court as a Deputy Chief Justice of the Republic of South Africa and is well respected across the world of his contribution. May I have a seat? There's a point of order on the virtual platform.
Honorable Chair, I can remember mentioning that he was the Deputy President of the PAC, and that's the reason why he was in prison.
That is not a point of order. Proceed, member.
President Nyonzo. Chin.
After years in the legal profession, after years in the legal profession and having played various important roles in the country, Moseneke, Deputy Chief Justice, ascended to the Apex Court as the Deputy Chief Justice of the Republic of South Africa, is well represented across the world for his contribution to our freedom, democracy, human rights, and progressive jurisprudence. House Chair, with its foundation on the Freedom Charter, the policy position of the ANC on prisons has been consistent. In articulating its vision of the country, the ANC is ready to govern stated that a prison service for the country must play its part, not simply in restraining convicts, but in rehabilitating them. The ANC asserted that adequate resources should be made available for the human accommodation, education, training, and job placement of convicts. The ANC warned that the failure to do so would lead to expenditure of an ever-increasing number of new jails. The ANC remains committed against any inhuman and cruel punishment. Rehabilitation. Program 3 of the budget plays a critical role for the realization of the NDP's priority 5, which is social cohesion and building safe communities. Effective rehabilitation helps break the cycle of crime in our society, and this is being achieved by DCS through, amongst others, intensifying inmate skills development programs and offender labor optimization. However, correction is not the sole responsibility of government. Correction is a societal responsibility. Based on the ideas contained in the Constitution, all South Africans should contribute to maintaining and protecting a just, peaceful, and safe society. Rehabilitation programs cannot be effective if the correctional centers are not safe and secure. The escalating crime rate in the country requires different interventions at different levels. Despite the involvement of other government departments such as the South African Police Service and the Department of Justice in attempts to combat crime, the Department of Correctional Services has been solely assigned with the responsibility of rehabilitating offenders. The escalating rate is alarming and suggests that the offender rehabilitation process is not as effective as it should be. One of the major concerns is the unavailability of resources within the correctional centers to facilitate this process. Overcrowding in correctional facilities also creates an enormous challenge for the DCS, and this negatively impacts on rehabilitation. House Chair, in terms of the budget, the Department of Correctional Service will receive 26.1 billion in this current financial year, which is 2023-2024. This is a decrease of 1.9%, or would be 509.3 million, which was stated by the chair for the previous allocation, which was the previous financial year, 2022-2023. The rehabilitation program is allocated an amount of 2.3 billion, receiving 7% of the overall allocation to the vote. A total of 72% of the allocation to the program is for compensation of employees. These budget cuts are gravely concerning. House Chair Kofi Annan, the former Secretary General of the United Nations, once said, open quote, "No one is born a good citizen. No nation is born a democracy. Rather, both are processes that continue to evolve over a lifetime. Young people must be included from birth. A society that cuts off from its youth serves its lifeline, close quote. We must show our appreciation for the work of the DCS in educating young offenders. For example, the Esitubeni Youth School in KZN is one of the best performing schools in the region, recording years of consecutive 100% pass rate. In 2021, the school produced 3 of the top 5 best performing teachers and the 2nd best student nationally. House Chair, we welcome the work done by the Department of Correctional Services and the National Development Agency in conducting joint programs geared towards empowering offenders, parolees, probationers, victims of crime, and members of the community and society at large. The learnership offered is aimed at preventing ex-offenders from relapsing into a life of crime due to them idling at home with nothing or little to do. It has been reported that the Vemba TVET College has also identified students who will be trained on the program. House Chair, last year, Minister Ronald Lamola indicated that during the devastating floods in KZN and the Eastern Cape, which resulted in the loss of lives, home, possessions, and hopes, inmates through the DCS self-sufficiency and sustainability model contributed towards the social relief and efforts. This year, the minister reported that all the correctional centers are implementing self-sufficiency strategic framework, and through this framework, the government has saved a total of 372 million in the last 3 financial years, and this House Chair must be applauded. House Chair, we know the challenges the department is facing and urge it to continue doing its work and ensuring that South Africa is a safer place in collaboration with other stakeholders and department. The department has the ability to correct offending behavior, rehabilitating people, and ensuring that, as in the case of our former Deputy Chief Justice, Museneke, they become their own liberators. I thank you, House Chair.
Thank you. AIC. Cope. I now call Honorable Nyonso, who has been approved to debate from the virtual platform.
Thank you very much, Comrade Chair. Before I say anything, let me remind you that the Deputy Chief Justice, Dikgang Museneke, is the Chief Justice this country never had. You did not make him Chief Justice because at some point he was the Deputy President of the PAC. History doesn't have black pages. You did not make him the Chief Justice because he is still an irredeemable Pan-Africanist, never subscribed to Freedom Charter. With that said, Comrade Chair, it is difficult to know what to understand when the Department of Correctional Services is mentioned. When Correctional Services is mentioned, what is clear is that the Correctional Services Department needs correction itself. The public image they hold is that of a den and a thieves of robbers who are in charge of the facilities that keep them to prepare and condition offenders into state and narrow behavioral patterns. The DCS is prominent in the Zondo Commission report for being used as a conduit of corruption and money laundering through Busasa Company. The DCS is reported to be having increased escapees of offenders in its care. This factor must be examined and corrected. The prison numbers gang still hold sway and have increased their influence. This is not conducive for turning offenders around into citizens with good potential. The DCS is in the news for wrong reasons, with the allegation of hosting a sting of hired assassins who are unleashed to society to commit murder and mayhem. The DCS management is lax, allowing staff members to have intimate relations with offenders. The gap is too huge between the DCS and the G4S, private company assigned to run security prison facilities for extremely dangerous offenders. This needs urgent attention. The PAC had some of its members of the armed wing in prison for offenses conducted during the freedom struggle. Most are out on parole. The point is their continued imprisonment is uncalled for. Parole is an extension of imprisonment. They now have criminal records in their name for fighting against apartheid and settler colonialism. This must be expunged. Because the PAC supports this budget. Thank you, Honorable Chair.
Thank you. Honorable Breitenbach, you have an extra additional minute, so you have 7 minutes to debate.
Honorable House Chair, honorable members. Today we must discuss the performance of the Department of Correctional Services and the role of the Honorable Lamola as the Minister, who incidentally she takes his fashion advice from the Honorable Mochecha. While Mr. Lamola was appointed to this role with much promise and fanfare, his tenure has been marked by a number of significant failures and shortcomings. One of them is fashion advice. One of the key areas where Mr. Lamola has failed is in his inability to address the issue of corruption within the department. Despite promising to root out corruption and to promote transparency and accountability within the department, Mr. Lamola has failed to take any meaningful action to address the endemic corruption that has plagued the department for many years. As the tawdry details of the long-running Bosasa saga unfold, it is clear that the entire department requires an overhaul, introducing measures to improve controls and accountability. The corruption within the Department of Correctional Services has had a devastating impact on the lives of inmates, who are often subject to physical abuse, neglect, and other forms of mistreatment at the hands of other inmates, and also prison officials. This abuse is carried out with relative impunity. While the Office of the Inspecting Judge has the mandate to investigate and make findings in this regard, the Minister and the Department have demonstrated a distinct lack of enthusiasm in establishing the Judicial Inspectorate as an independent and properly resourced entity. Mr. Lamola has failed to address this issue with any urgency, and as a result, the abuse of power and violation of human rights within the department has continued to go unchecked. This matter should have been attended to long ago, and if we are to see any accountability, it must be done with some urgency. Furthermore, Mr. Lamola has failed to address the issue of overcrowding within South African prisons. Despite acknowledging the severity of this issue, he has failed to implement any meaningful solutions to address it. This has led to chronic and continued overcrowding, which has made it impossible for officials to provide inmates the resources and services they need to live in a safe and healthy environment. Overcrowding is endemic in South African prisons, currently standing at 47% again. In 2021, Minister, during this debate, you announced that 1.6 billion would be spent over the medium term then to create new facilities at Parys, Burgersdorp, and Lichtenburg. Now, 2 years later, as is the tradition with correctional services, the contractor in Parys has been liquidated. Burgersdorp is still in the planning phase, and Lichtenburg is on hold because the ANC local government there cannot assure a reliable water supply. The amount of additional bed spaces created is 0. Centres in the Eastern Cape are 63% overcrowded, while the Western Cape is at 49% and Gauteng prisons are overcrowded by 45%. This leads to numerous related complications and makes a mockery of any attempt at rehabilitation. It affects the health of inmates and also has a negative effect upon those whose task it is to guard them. Inmates are routinely locked in their communal cells for upwards of 20 hours daily, only being let out for 1 hour of exercise and for meals, which often take the form of all 3 daily meals being served in one sitting. Another area where Mr. Lamola has fallen short is his lack of action on the issue of rehabilitation and reintegration. While he has acknowledged the importance of these issues, he has failed to implement any meaningful programs or initiatives to support the rehabilitation and reintegration of offenders. This has contributed to the incredibly high rates of recidivism within South African criminal justice system and has further compounded the already dire situation with correctional services. This will continue for as long as only a fraction of the budget is spent on rehabilitation programs, the rest being spent on Bosasa and other similarly opaque projects. If prisons can now produce and prepare their own food, then why did we pay Bosasa millions to do this for years? No discussion of the Department of Correctional Services would be complete without reference to the recent and continuing Thaba Bester debacle. At the outset, I must express my deep concern and disappointment at the overall handling handling of the matter by the Minister of the Department of Correctional Services and G4S. The case of Bester, who was granted parole by Correctional Services and then went on to commit numerous violent crimes, is a tragic example of the failure of our criminal justice system. It's a failure that has cost innocent lives and brought grief to families and communities, and shines a glaring light on our inability to address gender-based violence in South Africa. This failure is not just about Bester, it is about the Department of Correctional Services and G4S, who were responsible for his supervision and monitoring, and it is clear that they both failed in their duty. G4S is a private company responsible for monitoring Bester, failed to detect his criminal behavior and prevent him from committing more crimes. This failure is a clear indication of the lack of supervision of the company's employees. While rampant corruption is obvious, the contracting company takes a devil-may-care approach, accepting no liability, and take a rather casual approach with regard to vetting and monitoring of staff members. But the total and absolute failure of the entire security cluster to act in anything resembling a responsible fashion after the escape of Bester is breathtaking. In the full knowledge that the body found in the cell was not that of Bester, in the face of the ineluctable conclusion that Bester escaped, no effort was made to rearrest him. But more importantly, no effort whatsoever was made to warn or inform or support or protect any of the surviving victims. In a country where we have just passed significant laws to combat gender-based violence, where women are raped and killed on a daily basis, the leaders of our security cluster just looked the other way. This is a shameful indictment on the ministers involved in that and in their departments. To demonstrate the total lack of inconsistency of approach, on the 13th of April this year, this minister stated confidently that the G4S contract would not be cancelled. 2 weeks later, he flip-flopped and cancelled the contract. This matter is far from over, Minister, and be sure that we will leave no stone unturned to get to the truth. It is time for Minister Lamola to take decisive action to address these issues and to ensure that the Department of Correctional Services is able to carry out its vital role in a responsible and ethical manner. In short, Minister, it's time for you to do your job. I thank you.
Thank you. I call on Honorable Yankee. You have an extra minute, 14 minutes to debate.
Thank you, House Chair. Let me begin this debate by sharing a quote, an open quote. A degree of civilization is in a society can be judged by entering its prisons, close quote. And this would have been said by Fyodor Dostoevsky, a Russian novelist. South Africa's criminal justice system has undergone reforms aimed at reflecting the tenets of the Constitution and undoing the legacy of our oppressive past. It is well known that the apartheid justice system was a repressive tool in the hands of the state, and that incarceration made little, if any, distinction between activists like Kgalema, Dikgang, criminals, children, and adults. It didn't bother. The colonial apartheid prison system was meant to dehumanize and warehouse offenders. Since 1994, there have been moves to reform the criminal justice system away from the apartheid legacy, guided by a constitutional demand for safe, secure, and humane incarceration. Prisons were demilitarized. The direction of these institutional changes has placed greater emphasis on human rights and included a more restorative vocabulary in policy documents. The objectives of the rehabilitation process, as summarized in the 2004 white paper, are to focus on correcting offending behavior, enhancing human development, and promoting social responsibility. To deal with its core business, the department adopted a needs-based approach to rehabilitation. Needs-based interventions are interventions which are specifically targeted to causal factors with the unique profile of the offender. The white paper therefore recommended that the department develop an individualized correctional sentence plan that will take the correctional setting of the individual into account. Section 38(2) of the Correctional Services Act stipulates that offender-specific assessment measures needs to be developed to ensure the most effective utilization of rehabilitation programs to address individual offender behavior. Rehabilitation must therefore be aimed at individual unique needs. Ineffective rehabilitation programs are largely responsible for recidivism. In many instances, offenders are rearrested, reconvicted, and re-imprisoned for the same crimes. It has been suggested that the cycle of recidivism is attributed to the failure of a rehabilitation program. One of the reasons for failures in the rehabilitation programs is because a needs-based approach is not adequately followed for each inmate. One of the major challenges facing the DCS is overcrowding. Overcrowding leads to gang activity, a decrease in correctional official supervision and control, a lower standard of living for all inmates, and disciplinary violations amongst offenders. In addition to overcrowding, gangsterism and a shortage of specialist personnel and inadequate rehabilitation equipment such as library facilities are impediments to effective rehabilitation. From a rehabilitation and reintegration perspective, overcrowding has a severely negative impact as it continues to undermine in almost every conceivable manner the positive impact that programs could have. Overcrowding can have a significant negative impact on offenders' well-being. When the weight of offenders' numbers overwhelms physical and human resources, correctional services delivery is constrained in many respects. Overcrowding negatively affects officials too. The 2016 GHC annual report found that overcrowding in combination with staff shortages is a primary source of stress amongst correctional officials. Let's just walk back a bit now so that to create a particular context and remind this House and the nation about the Jali Commission report. In 2001, President Thabo Mbeki established the Jali Commission of Inquiry into Corruption and Administration in the Department of Correctional Services. Before the establishment of the Jali Commission, there had been at least 20 investigations into irregularities and abuses within the department. In 2000, it was reported to Parliament that the state had lost control of the DCS. It was in this context that the commission was established. In 2005, the Jali Commission submitted its full report with recommendations to the president. The Jali Commission had a particular scope. It examined, for example, only 9 of the department's 52 management areas, as well as specific focal areas defined in the commission's terms of reference. The mandate given to the commission was indicative of the scale and scope of corruption, maladministration, and the rights and violations in the DCS. Just take us a minute. In 2001, these were not problems of democracy. This is what we inherited. That is heilige mors vessels wat ons inherit in 2001. These would not have been created by 1994. But yet, because of the continuity of our struggle, we had to institute this. While it is acknowledged that there have been some notable improvements in the decade since the commission submitted its report, especially when assessed against the crisis engulfed DCS of the late 1990s, many also argue that imprisonment has not fundamentally changed since then. On the positive side, great strides have been made to rid the DCS of high-level corruption and to re-establish state control of the department. Supply chain management was improved, a new disciplinary code was established, corrupt officials were dismissed and they continue to be dismissed, and large-scale training of staff was undertaken, to name just a few improvements since such a report. But that report also dealt with issues of gang management strategy on policy and sexual violence. That the Jali Commission was extremely critical of how the department had failed to deal with prison gangs. Sexual violence is a regrettable part of South Africa's prison landscape, and it is frequently, but not exclusively, linked to the number of gangs. Jali described it as the horrific scourge of sexual violence that plagues our prisons, where appalling abuses and acts of sexual perversions are perpetrated on helpless and unprotected prisoners. The Jolly Commission was also appalled at how the DCS had failed victims of sexual violence. And then you had the issue of overcrowding as part of the issues that the Jolly Commission took up. Overcrowding, perhaps to understand it properly, one might even make an example about the education system. To get better outcomes in education system, you are not going to get that with 100 kids in a class. You've got to reduce that in order to rehabilitate. Overcrowding is a major challenge for the department because it exacerbates the problem of corruption and maladministration, affects the rehabilitation of the prisoners, encourages sexual abuse of inmates. The commission was disturbed to also hear evidence of prisoners who for a fear could disappear from a prison or escape. It also found that the department does not do enough to ensure that staff who aid in these escapes are severely punished. That was in 2001. But in conclusion, in terms of that report, the overall impression gained is that many of these problems identified by the Jolly Commission are still present in the system. While overcrowding is largely a problem created outside of the department's control, rights violations such as assaults by the officials, inter-prisoner violence, access to healthcare and other support services are very much within the department's control. Overcrowding, corruption, impunity, rights violation and services that do not reach sufficient numbers of prisoners and leave much to be desired with regard to impact. All indications as we stand here are that there have been significant improvement in the DCS, especially regarding corruption, maladministration, but that there's a plenty that remains unacceptably dysfunctional. Some of the highlights that we can share is that from the Department Correctional Services presentation in terms of 2022, it included the following. The number of escapes decreased significantly from 117 in 2020, 2021 to 22 last year. The 22 escapes reported in 2021-22 financial year is the lowest recorded number of escapes in the past 27 years. As at 31st March 2022, the inmate population was made up of, and this is an important context that we need to understand, of 96,000 sentence offenders and 47,000 remand detainees. This gives you a total of 142,000 in prison compared to a bed space of 118 that you have. This is the nature of overcrowding that we have to deal with. With regards to the rehabilitation programs, a total of 8,000 offenders participated in educational programs. The DCS has also achieved an unqualified opinion audit for 2 consecutive years. We want to applaud the self-sufficiency program by the minister as an emerging positive spark that is happening. But also what is important is that tomorrow, those who are raising issues of parole system, we are having a portfolio committee meeting to discuss the very same matter, and therefore you are invited in that discussion. We have also begun initiatives as the portfolio committee to look at alternative bail approach system, and members who are part of that committee are aware of that. Perhaps an even bigger context to be given to honorable vessels. As things stand, the issue of triple Ps, private prisons, out of 243 correctional centers, there's only 2 in the country that we have, only 2. We've got to make that context and understand it. And those 2 don't take more than 5,000 altogether, as compared to the 142,000 that you have in all other centers. It's important to understand that context. And in fact, those I can share today that your vessels and others are turning their back on privatization. So when privatization does not work, they don't like it, but they always call for it. But I can also indicate that at the time when this happened, the issue was a pilot mechanism, not necessarily privatization. It was about how do you deal with issues of overcrowding. To Honorable Nyonso, we are quoting ideas here, we are not quoting membership of individuals. So your issue of Deputy President Dikgao Mosane is misplaced. But we have also indicated, colleagues, that the issue of the contract, it was us who raised this as members on the day when the department came in front of us. Some of you did not even pose that question, but we posed the question and said, now that things are like this, you've got 18 breaches, what do you do? The department indicated and responded and say, we are awaiting a legal opinion. Once they receive that legal opinion, this is now they are taking that decision. I don't know about this thing that they refused. They indicated that it will never happen. It is also misplaced and misdirected. But as we conclude, Honorable Judge President, former judge of the Constitutional Court, Albisset, when he was asked in a debate 2 questions, he was asked whether this is the country that he fought for. His answer was, this is indeed the country that I fought for. But the second part of that answer was, is this the society that you fought for? And his response was, this is not yet the society that we fought for as part of our national democratic society that we're trying to build. We're therefore forging ahead, and we are going to be doing more of this as we win the election in 2024 and improve on these programs. Thank you.
Thank you. We call now on the Honorable Minister of Justice and Correctional Services, Honorable Lamola. You have 9 minutes.
Oh, thank you. Thank you very much, Honorable Bredenbach, for this minute. You could have shared some of them with the Honorable Horn. I see he's yearning to say something. But thank you very much to all members of the Portfolio Committee who have supported this budget. Honorable Sheikh, we agree with you on everything, including on Palestine. We thank everyone for the support. Honorable Engelbrecht, while we concede that remand detention is problematic and overcrowding, the reality is that there are external factors affecting the issue of remand detention and overcrowding. The first one is the level of crime in society, which we have to reduce. And the reality that every day inmates are being convicted, they are coming into our facilities. And we cannot be able to construct facilities at the same pace as the conviction. So that is what the system needs to find a way to resolve. And all of us have to play our role in resolving that challenge. Hence, we are looking at all systems in the entire criminal justice cluster with the police, with the NPA, with the judicial officers, and also within correctional services to resolve this challenge of overcrowding in terms of second chance and other methods that must help us to deal with this matter. Honorable Yako, on the notion of prison industrial complex, we know that you have just cut and pasted a perspective from American activist Angela Davis, which is completely out of line with the South African context. So when you quote, you must quote within the context of our country. It is irrelevant, it is not in sync. There is no logic in rejecting a budget because it is not enough. Support it, but also call for it to be increased if you care about corrections. Honorable vessels, the G4S contract, as the Honorable Janchi said, it was a pilot project with the Mangaung Correctional Facility. And there is a positive in this contract. And the positive is that they are leaving us with infrastructure. It is not correct that we are going to look for new infrastructure. There is infrastructure there that can take 2,900 inmates. So that is a positive. We can't throw the baby with the bathwater. What we need to deal with now is how we operationalize the center, who must be employed, vetting and all that. And that is what the department is doing in the process of taking over that facility. The land now, it's the facility and everything belongs to the state. The review of the parole system is something that is in the process. And we are working with the Department of Monitoring and Evaluation to evaluate and review the parole system. The NCCS, which is responsible for advising me on policy matters, has already commented on some of the issues. And also GHC is in that process. It is also not correct, honorable vessels. You must share with us where you get these statistics that 90% of released inmates and parolees re-offend. You are misleading the House. There's no such statistics. The correct statistics is that 99% comply with their parole conditions, and that most of those that are released comply. But it is a fact that the few that violate their parole conditions and the few who were ex-offenders who commit offense, they commit horrendous crime, which makes international headlines and which then looks like everyone of the released inmates behaves like them. And that is what the system must correct. It is for that reason that we have got a partnership now with the University of Limpopo to deal with the rehabilitation program, so that when our inmates are released, are able to behave in a manner that is corrective and that is exemplary. And it's for that reason that the self-sufficiency program is also aimed to give them skills, so that when they are released, they've got a skill that they can use to participate economically in the life of society, but also a skill they can use for any social activity. So the self-sustainable program, I am happy that all political parties in this House agree that it's a huge success. There is no one here who can stand up in this House and say that we are not succeeding with the self-sustainability program. The Department of Correctional Services can stand here tall that we are one of the entrepreneurial departments that is addressed and run in a self-sustainable way. And we're building that capability and the capable state that will enable this state to be able to be responsive to its needs financially and also in terms of its own capability. Prof. Msimang, siyajabula baba ukuthi you support the budget and uvumelana nathi. Kodwa ngikuzwile, you criticize the IFP and you also criticize yourself by saying that you thought that we will have now in the early stages of our democracy, having attended or addressed all challenges at correctional services. This department was run by former ministers coming from the IFP, Honorable Mzimela and Honorable Skosana. So this department here, Prof. Msima, uma criticize ukuthi akusebenzanga, kusho ukuthi kule foundation ekuqaleni aniwenzanga umsebenzi. Kodwa siyajabula ukuthi nivumelana nathi, niyayisupporta le budget, sijabula kakhulu Prof. Msimang. Nalokunye okushilo sivumelana nawe ukuthi hayi no, sibambile sihamba kahle, kodwa la kufanele silungise khona, sizolungisa njengoba usho. Honorable Nyoso, the department is not a conduit for corruption. The issues you are raising about Bosasa, this administration, we terminated the Bosasa contract and started the self-sustainable program. So we are not only dealing with G4S and the Mangaung Center. When I came in, the issues of Bosasa were all over, but we have now resolved those issues and we are moving forward. Honorable Bredenbach, we have addressed all those issues you are raising about Bosasa. I was the one here. You were here also as an honorable member. When we took over the process, we insourced and did what was practically possible. And now I can tell you across the country, the correctional services officials, they can walk tall in each and every township of South Africa, that they are doing a good job. There are challenges indeed, but they are resolving them, and there is no longer a skunk of the South African public. We have turned around this department, and evidence is there from the AG's audit of our performance indicators. We have improved from when we took over to now. We are not thumb sucking, it's reality. It can be touched. You can go to any center and touch it with your own hands and see this self-sustainability in any facility. You go to Koshimampuru, you go to Lokop, you go anywhere, you can touch it, Honorable Hope. And I do agree with Honorable Danji that indeed, and Honorable Kumuto, that indeed our work is visible, it can be seen. I understand that the EFF, they are yearning for this, Mam Kaul. Ngoba, we are already implementing your imagined manifesto. We are not imagining it, we are doing it. We are building a capable state. We are doing insourcing. You can see it in every center. We are producing. We are not a government of the future. This government is doing it, and you cannot have any ground. Thank you very much. This budget is for self-sustainability.
Thank you. That concludes the debate. Order, members. That concludes the debate and the business of this mini plenary. The mini plenary will now rise.
Recording stopped.